Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. The security footage is grainy, time-stamped August 28th, 11:47 PM. Multiple monitors in the European Space Agency's control room in Darmstadt show solar imagery as technicians work frantically. Dr. Nathan Korrin can be seen in the background, his hands pressed against his temples, staring at a display that shows something that shouldn't exist. His coffee cup sits forgotten, steam no longer rising from its surface, as if time itself has stopped in that moment of discovery. Voices pierce through the distorted audio. That can't be right. And run it again. Someone whispers, God help us all. The footage cuts to black, but not before capturing Corin's face, the exact moment a man's understanding of reality crumbles. Dr. Nathan Corin sits before the camera 3 weeks later, his transformation startling. The man who once delivered confident presentations on solar physics to packed auditoriums now appears haunted by knowledge he wishes he could forget. His usually immaculate appearance is disheveled. Silver stubble covers his jaw, and his eyes dart occasionally toward the window, as if expecting something to appear in the sky. The 42-year-old solar physicist speaks directly to the lens with a voice that trembles slightly. What I'm about to tell you will change everything we thought we knew about our solar system, about our place in the universe, and about why we're really here. 3 weeks ago, we found something that has been watching us for longer than our civilization has existed. We found our owners. August 24th. The morning started with coffee and routine at the ESA facility in Darmstadt. Corin had been monitoring solar activity using the Solar Orbiter spacecraft for 18 months, part of humanity's most ambitious attempt to understand our star's mysteries. He still remembers the taste of that last normal cup of coffee, bitter, slightly too hot, accompanied by the gentle hum of servers processing routine data from humanity's most advanced solar observation platform. The work had become second nature, tracking solar flares, measuring magnetic field fluctuations, analysing coronal mass ejections. It was the kind of predictable science that had defined his career for 2 decades, the comfortable routine of a man who believed the universe held mysteries but not horrors. The collaboration with NASA on joint solar research had been particularly fruitful. Dr. Eliana Price, a brilliant astrophysicist from the Goddard Space Flight Center, had been working with Corin's team on coronal mapping for the better part of a year. Their professional relationship had developed into genuine friendship, built on late-night data reviews and shared fascination with humanity's nearest star. Price had a laugh that could fill a room, and a mind sharp enough to spot anomalies in datasets that would take others weeks to notice. I remember the exact moment everything changed, Corin recalls, his fingers drumming nervously against the table in a rhythm that matches no earthly music. It was 10:17 AM, Price called from Maryland, and I could hear something in her voice I'd never heard before. Uncertainty, mixed with what I now realized was the first note of terror that would consume all our lives. She'd been reviewing overnight data from the solar orbiter when she noticed an anomaly in the Lagrange point 1 readings. The footage shows actual solar orbiter imagery, alongside computer reconstructions that took weeks to compile and cost several technicians their sanity. Price appears in a recorded video call, her usually composed demeanour cracked like ice under pressure. Behind her, whiteboards are covered with calculations that seem to grow more frantic toward the edges, mathematical equations that spiral into desperate attempts to to make sense of the impossible. "Nathan," she said in that recorded call, her voice barely steady, "you need to see this. The object is massive beyond anything we've ever encountered, but perfectly stationary relative to the sun's rotation. I've run diagnostics 17 times, convinced our equipment was malfunctioning. I even had Jenkins check the hardware remotely. But the readings are consistent, impossible as they seem. Nothing natural could maintain that position without being torn apart by solar gravity. Nothing natural could be that large and remain undetected. Nothing natural could be that perfectly engineered." What made Price's discovery even more unsettling was its implications for everything they thought they knew about solar observation. The Lagrange Point 1 position, approximately 900,000 miles from Earth toward the Sun, was supposed to be empty space monitored continuously by multiple agencies. It was one of 5 gravitational balance points where the combined gravitational forces of Earth and the Sun create stable parking spots for spacecraft. The Solar and Heliospheric Observatory had been stationed there for decades without detecting anything larger than space debris. Dr. Pavel Ilyich joined the investigation within hours, connected remotely from the Institute for Applied Mathematics in Moscow. The Russian orbital mechanics specialist was known throughout the scientific community for his ability to calculate trajectories that seemed impossible to other scientists. A man who dreamed in orbital mechanics and woke with solutions to problems that had puzzled NASA for decades. His preliminary analysis of the object's position and apparent mass sent shockwaves through the small group of researchers now aware of the discovery. When Pavel sent me his initial calculations, I thought there had been a translation error in the automated system, Corin admits, his hands shaking as he remembers opening that email. The object measured over 2,000 miles in length and roughly 400 miles in width at its thickest point. To put that in perspective, that's larger than the entire state of Delaware, suspended in space with perfect stability behind our sun. But what truly disturbed us wasn't just the size, it was the craftsmanship. This thing had smooth, deliberate contours that screamed artificial construction. This wasn't some rogue asteroid or comet wandering through our system. This was engineered by intelligences that made human technology look like stone tools. The object's surface exhibited a peculiar property that defied conventional understanding of materials science. Initial spectroscopic analysis suggested it was composed of metals, but metals arranged in crystalline structures that shouldn't exist according to known physics. The hull appeared to be a single continuous surface without seams, joints, or the kind of modular construction that characterized even humanity's most advanced spacecraft. It was as if the entire structure had been grown rather than built, shaped by technologies that treated matter like clay. August 26th. The secure briefing room at ESA headquarters felt different that morning, charged with the electricity of impending revelation. Corin had attended hundreds of meetings in the same space over his career, but never with this level of security. Phone jammers had been installed overnight, creating a dead zone of silence that felt unnatural in the connected modern world. Additional guards posted at every entrance carried sidearms and expressions that suggested they knew more about the situation than they were authorized to discuss. Each attendee required to surrender all electronic devices before entering, their phones and tablets locked in metal boxes that looked more like coffins than storage containers. Commander Arjun Sethi from the Indian Space Research Organization arrived first, his usually warm demeanor replaced by grim professionalism that aged him a decade overnight. Dr. Rebecca Martinez from NASA's Deep Space Network followed, carrying encrypted hard drives that never left her sight and had required armed escort from Langley. Within an hour, representatives from space agencies across the globe had assembled for what would later be called the most important scientific briefing in human history, and possibly the last free discussion humanity would have about its own fate. The moment we began comparing data, the scope of what we were dealing with became terrifyingly clear. Sethi explains in archive communications recovered from his personal files. This wasn't a recent arrival that had wandered into our solar system. Analysis of historical solar observation data going back 15 years showed subtle gravitational perturbations that we previously attributed to measurement error or equipment drift. The object had been there all along, hidden in the sun's glare like a predator waiting in tall grass. We simply hadn't been looking in the right place, or perhaps we hadn't been allowed to see it until now. Enhanced imaging capabilities, combining resources from multiple space agencies and several military satellites that officially didn't exist, revealed details that challenged every assumption about the mysterious craft. The hull's surface absorbed nearly all incident solar radiation, making it appear as an absolute void against the brilliant backdrop of the sun's corona. This wasn't simply dark-coloured metal. This was material that seemed to devour light itself, as if photons ceased to exist upon contact with its surface. Along the object's starboard side, massive apertures had been carved into the hull with surgical precision. These weren't random openings, but precisely engineered structures, each one roughly the size of a city block and arranged in geometric patterns that hurt to contemplate for extended periods. High-resolution imaging showed these apertures could rotate independently, like enormous telescope arrays or weapon systems designed to target objects across interstellar distances. Their current configuration suggested they were pointing away from Earth, but the mechanical precision of their movement implied they could redirect toward any target with terrifying efficiency. The interior spaces visible through these openings defied human comprehension of scale and purpose. Chambers large enough to house entire metropolitan areas stretched into darkness beyond the reach of any Earth-based imaging system. The architecture within these chambers followed geometric principles that seemed designed for minds that process space and dimension differently than human consciousness. Some sections showed patterns that resembled vast libraries or data storage centers, with structures that could contain the accumulated knowledge of entire galactic civilizations. We started developing our own terminology for different sections of the craft, Dr. Martinez admits, her voice barely above a whisper in recovered audio files. The observatory section for the rotating apertures, the cathedral for the massive central chamber that seemed to pulse with its own internal light, the galleries for what appeared to be endless corridors connecting chambers whose purposes we couldn't begin to guess. It helped us maintain some semblance of scientific objectivity when everything we were seeing challenged our understanding of what was possible in this universe. August 30th. Dr. Ilyach's breakthrough came during what should have been routine monitoring of background radiation from the deep space networks and most sensitive receivers. The Russian mathematician had been working 18-hour days, fueled by a combination of caffeine, determination, and growing fear about what they had discovered. His detection of structured radio transmissions emanating from the object marked the moment when the situation transformed from mysterious to actively terrifying. The transmissions utilized the hydrogen 21 centimeter frequency. Ilyach explains through a secure communication link, his English heavily accented but precise, each word carefully chosen by a man who understood that his findings might be humanity's first and last communication with intelligences beyond Earth. This is the wavelength scientists have theorized for decades as the most logical choice for interstellar communication: universal, penetrating, and unlikely to be confused with natural phenomena. But these weren't random signals or simple mathematical proofs of intelligence. They followed deliberate patterns that suggested the sender understood not just mathematics, but Earth's exact position, orbital mechanics, and even our technological capabilities. What made the transmissions even more unsettling was their increasing intensity and growing complexity. As Earth's orbit brought the planet into better alignment with the hidden craft, Each signal grew stronger and incorporated new elements that suggested real-time adaptation. Analysis revealed that the transmissions were being adjusted continuously, modified based on Earth's exact position and orbital mechanics with precision that required computational power beyond human imagination. The content of the transmissions remained largely indecipherable initially, but their structure suggested a countdown, or sequence of instructions building toward a specific event. Dr. Ilyich identified recurring elements that appeared at regular intervals, like timestamps or phase markers in some cosmic protocol. Whatever message was being transmitted, it was building towards something scheduled to occur when Earth reached a particular position in its orbit around the Sun. The timing wasn't random, Corin explains, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might attract unwanted attention. The transmissions intensified precisely when Earth moved into positions that would optimize reception. It wasn't just that something was trying to communicate with us. It knew exactly where we were, where we would be, and when we would be listening. That level of prediction suggested observation spanning not just decades but centuries, possibly millennia. We weren't discovering something new. We were finally noticing something that had been watching us since before human civilization began. Sleep became impossible for the growing number of scientists aware of the situation. The psychological pressure of keeping such a monumental discovery secret while trying to understand its implications created an atmosphere of barely controlled panic among the research teams. Several team members reported identical nightmares of vast corridors and the sensation of being observed by intelligences that remained just beyond perception. September 2nd, thermal imaging provided the most disturbing revelations yet about the object's true nature and the technology that had created it. The hull's temperature readings were unlike anything in Earth's scientific experience, defying fundamental laws of thermodynamics that had governed human understanding of physics for centuries. Rather than absorbing solar heat, as any normal object would, the surface appeared to be several degrees colder than the cosmic background radiation of deep space, as if it were actively cooling itself or drawing thermal energy from its surroundings for purposes unknown. The thermal profile made no sense according to our understanding of physics, Dr. Price explains, in her final recorded interview before the communication blackout, her hands trembling as she reviews data that challenged everything she had learned in 2 decades of astrophysics. An object that large, positioned that close to the Sun, should be radiating enormous amounts of heat. Instead, it appeared to be acting as a massive heat sink, drawing thermal energy from the surrounding space and somehow converting or storing it. The implications were staggering. This suggested technology that could manipulate fundamental thermodynamic laws, essentially rewriting the rules of physics within its operational sphere. Internal mapping revealed architectural features that challenged human comprehension of scale, purpose, and the very nature of intelligent design. The massive chambers visible through the apertures were arranged in patterns that suggested cities or industrial complexes, but designed for inhabitants of unknown size, physiology, and mental architecture. The geometry of these spaces seemed to follow mathematical principles that human minds could barely grasp, creating optical illusions that made observers feel dizzy and disoriented. Corridor networks stretched for hundreds of miles through the craft's interior, connecting chambers that served purposes beyond current human understanding. Some passages appeared to spiral through dimensions that shouldn't exist within the craft's external measurements, suggesting the use of space-folding technology or manipulation of local space-time geometry. The corridors themselves pulsed with faint bioluminescent patterns that resembled neural networks or data transmission systems operating on a planetary scale. Some sections appeared to be manufacturing facilities with geometric patterns suggesting assembly lines or processing centers designed to handle materials on a scale that dwarfed Earth's entire industrial capacity. The machinery visible in these areas moved with fluid precision, suggesting automation systems that had been operating continuously for periods that could span geological ages. Other areas resembled vast libraries or data storage centres, with structures that could contain the accumulated knowledge, genetic patterns, and cultural information of entire galactic civilizations. The storage systems appeared to be organised according to some universal cataloguing system, with sections dedicated to different types of information: biological specimens, technological artifacts, cultural records, and what appeared to be consciousness patterns or memories stored in crystalline matrices. We began referring to it as the Ark, Corin admits, his voice heavy with the weight of understanding that no human should have to bear, not officially, but among ourselves when we thought no one was listening. The scale and purpose suggested it wasn't just a spacecraft, but a mobile repository designed to collect, preserve, and transport the essence of entire worlds across interstellar distances. The question that kept us awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering if we were being watched even in our homes, was simple but terrifying. What had built something this massive? How long had they been collecting specimens from worlds like Earth? And why was it revealing itself to us now? September 5th. The international response was swift, coordinated, and more comprehensive than any cover-up in human history. Government agencies worldwide implemented communication restrictions under the official designation Solar Storm Protocol Alpha, a cover story that attributed increased security measures to concerns about a pending coronal mass ejection that could damage global communications infrastructure and threaten satellite networks essential to modern civilization. Amateur astronomers found themselves visited by polite but firm government representatives who arrived in unmarked vehicles and carried credentials that couldn't be verified through normal channels. These visitors requested that hobbyist observers focus their telescopes on other areas of the sky, offering generous compensation for consulting work on unspecified projects that would keep them busy and their equipment pointed away from the sun. Professional observatories received new funding for priority research projects that conveniently redirected their most powerful instruments towards studies of distant galaxies and cosmic phenomena light years from Earth. The cover-up was comprehensive but not perfect, revealing cracks that suggested the situation was beyond even governmental control. Dr. Carlos Mendoza, an amateur astronomer operating a modest but sophisticated observatory in the Atacama Desert of Chile, captured footage that would briefly shake the walls of secrecy surrounding the discovery. During a solar eclipse, visible from South America, his equipment recorded a dark arc where none should exist according to astronomical predictions calculated decades in advance. I knew immediately that what I was seeing shouldn't exist in our understanding of the solar system, Mendoza explains in recovered audio recordings found in his abandoned observatory. The eclipse path had been calculated with mathematical precision for decades in advance, verified by observatories around the world. There should have been nothing capable of casting that shadow, no object large enough and positioned precisely to create that geometric arc. But there it was, a perfect shadow that appeared and disappeared in exact synchronization with the eclipse timing, as if something vast was using the eclipse as camouflage for a brief moment of visibility. Mendoza's footage appeared on social media platforms for exactly 47 minutes before being systematically removed by automated systems that worked with efficiency beyond normal content moderation. However, those 47 minutes were enough for the video to be downloaded, copied, and shared across obscure astronomy forums, conspiracy theory networks, and file sharing systems that operated outside mainstream internet infrastructure. Enhanced versions began appearing within hours, with amateur analysts using image processing software to identify details that professional astronomers were forbidden from discussing publicly. It was during this period of increasing scrutiny and growing leaks that Dr. Corin began receiving messages from Dr. Helena Webb, a retired SETI scientist who had spent 40 years developing theoretical frameworks for exactly this scenario. Webb had published papers in the 1980s proposing that advanced civilizations might use stellar bodies as camouflage for long-term observation posts, hiding massive structures in the gravitational shadows of stars where they could monitor developing worlds without detection. Dr. Webb's messages were initially dismissed as the theories of an elderly scientist seeking relevance in her retirement, Corin recalls, his expression showing regret for dismissing insights that proved unnervingly accurate. But her predictions about the object's orbital mechanics, its use of solar gravity for concealment, and its apparent interest in Earth's technological development proved correct in every detail. She had been waiting decades for confirmation of her theories, developing mathematical models for how such observation posts would operate, and now she was watching her life's work unfold in real time with all the terrifying implications she had feared. Webb's research suggested that any civilization capable of interstellar travel would likely establish monitoring posts near developing worlds, using local stellar bodies for concealment and power, while maintaining surveillance of planetary development across evolutionary timescales. Her calculations indicated that such an observation post could remain hidden behind Earth's sun for millions of years, while maintaining perfect surveillance of planetary development, recording every stage of biological evolution and cultural advancement. September 8th. The secrecy measures, despite their unprecedented scope and coordination, couldn't contain the growing evidence of the craft's influence on Earth's biosphere and the fundamental systems that supported life on the planet. Deep-sea monitoring stations operated by NOAA and international oceanographic institutions detected ultra-low frequency vibrations that matched the transmission signatures coming from the hidden object. The resonance patterns suggested the craft was using Earth's oceans as a massive amplification system, turning the planet's water into a speaker array for communications that could span interstellar distances and reach recipients throughout the galaxy. Dr. James Crawford, a marine biologist stationed at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, noticed the biological effects first during routine monitoring of whale migration patterns in the Pacific. His observations would later prove to be the first documented evidence of the craft's ability to influence life on Earth through methods that remained beyond human understanding. Whales began changing their migration patterns overnight, Crawford explains in archived research notes that were later classified at the highest levels of government secrecy. Pods that had followed the same routes for thousands of years, guided by magnetic navigation systems, refined over millions of years of evolution, suddenly altered course. Their songs became erratic and distressed, incorporating new vocalizations unlike anything in our databases, complex harmonics that seemed almost like responses to inaudible signals coming from beyond Earth's atmosphere. The phenomenon wasn't limited to marine life. Migratory birds across multiple continents deviated from routes established over millions of years of evolutionary programming, their internal compasses apparently overwhelmed by signals that interfered with magnetic navigation systems refined by natural selection across geological timescales. Flocks of Arctic terns abandoned their epic pole-to-pole journeys mid-flight, instead gathering in massive numbers at specific geographic coordinates that corresponded to optimal reception points for the craft's transmissions. Most disturbing were the effects on smaller animals with highly developed magnetic navigation systems. Bee colonies abandoned their hives en masse across multiple continents, leaving behind perfectly intact structures with no apparent cause. The abandoned hives contained full honey stores and healthy larvae, suggesting the departure was sudden, urgent, and motivated by instinctual terror rather than the gradual effects of disease or environmental stress. The animals were responding to something we couldn't detect with our instruments, Crawford continues, his voice growing more strained as he describes observations that challenged everything he understood about animal behavior. Their magnetic navigation systems evolved over millions of years to detect Earth's natural magnetic field, were being overwhelmed by signals that suggested intelligence and intent far beyond anything on this planet. They weren't just confused, they were fleeing from something that terrified them on an instinctual level that transcended learned behavior. Seismic monitoring stations detected unusual patterns in tectonic activity that correlated precisely with the craft's transmission schedule. Micro-earthquakes began occurring in geometric patterns that formed recognizable shapes when plotted on global maps. Spirals, concentric circles, and complex fractals that suggested the planet's geological systems were being manipulated or tested. The Earth itself seemed to be resonating in response to signals from the hidden object, as if the planet's core was being used as part of a massive communication array that spanned the solar system. September 12th. The decision to launch a direct investigation required approval from the highest levels of government across multiple nations, involving discussions in secure rooms where decisions affecting human civilization's future were made by individuals whose names would never appear in public records. The probe, designated Helios Sentinel, represented the most advanced spacecraft ever constructed for solar observation, incorporating technology that had been theoretical until the discovery made its deployment critical for human survival. Built in absolute secrecy over a period of just 2 weeks at a facility that officially didn't exist, the probe incorporated experimental systems that pushed the boundaries of human engineering capability. The construction process required pulling personnel from classified projects around the world, engineers and scientists who worked around the clock, knowing that they were building humanity's first deliberate contact with an intelligence beyond Earth. Launch from French Guiana occurred during a carefully orchestrated media blackout that involved redirecting satellite coverage, timing the mission during a period of minimum air traffic and ensuring that amateur observers were distracted by a manufactured meteor shower that drew attention away from the launch window. Official records listed the mission as a routine satellite deployment for improved weather monitoring, with documentation that would satisfy casual inspection while concealing the probe's true destination and purpose. Dr. Corin and Dr. Price monitored the mission from separate secure facilities, connected through encrypted communications that were updated every few minutes, to prevent interception by foreign intelligence agencies or the growing number of amateur investigators who had begun to suspect that something extraordinary was being concealed from the public. The probe's journey to Venus proceeded flawlessly, with all systems functioning within normal parameters, despite the experimental nature of much of its technology. Solar panel deployment, navigation systems, and communication arrays all performed exactly as designed, providing the mission controllers with a false sense that they were dealing with familiar technology and predictable physics. The probe's approach phase lasted 6 days, Price recalls, her hands trembling as she reviews archived telemetry data that recorded humanity's first deliberate approach to an alien intelligence. Everything remained normal until it crossed what we now believe was some kind of detection perimeter, approximately 50,000 kilometers from the object's hull. The moment it crossed that invisible boundary, everything changed in ways that suggested we were no longer dealing with passive observation, but active defense systems. The craft's response to the probe's approach was immediate, decisive, and demonstrated technological capabilities that rendered human space technology obsolete by comparison. Energy emissions that had remained constant for weeks suddenly spiked to levels that saturated monitoring equipment across the solar system and created electromagnetic interference visible to radio telescopes on Earth. The rotating apertures that had pointed away from Earth began moving for the first time since observation began, tracking the probe's approach with mechanical precision. that suggested automated defense systems had been activated. The final transmission lasted exactly 4.7 seconds, Price continues, her voice barely audible, as she recalls the moment that changed everything humanity thought it knew about its place in the universe. One clear, high-resolution image that revealed more about the craft's interior than weeks of external observation, followed by complete silence. The probe didn't just stop transmitting, it simply ceased to exist, as if it had been erased from reality itself. The image transmitted in those final seconds would haunt everyone who saw it, becoming burned into their memories with clarity that suggested the craft wanted its interior to be seen and understood. A massive metallic archway filled the frame, stretching beyond the probe's visual range and composed of materials that reflected light in ways that hurt human eyes to observe directly. Within that archway, arranged in perfect geometric precision that spoke of intelligence beyond human comprehension, were thousands of pod-like structures. Each pod was roughly the size of a small building, connected to the others by a network of conduits that pulsed with bioluminescent light in patterns that resembled neural networks or circulatory systems. The pods appeared to be dormant, but their design suggested they were containers meant to preserve something precious across interstellar distances and geological timescales. Viewing ports along each pod's surface reflected the probe's lights back with an unsettling regularity that implied occupancy by specimens that remained alive but suspended. The implications were staggering and immediate. Whatever the pods were designed to contain, there were enough of them to house representatives from entire worlds, preserved samples from thousands of different biospheres, or the accumulated biological diversity of an entire galaxy. The craft wasn't just a ship, it was a mobile ark carrying the essence of countless civilizations across the cosmos. September 14th. In the days following the probe's destruction, the psychological effects on the research team became impossible to ignore or explain through conventional understanding of human consciousness. Dr. Lisa Park from the Atacama Observatory was the first to report the dreams, vivid, recurring nightmares that felt more like memories than subconscious imagination, experiences that seemed to originate from somewhere outside her own mind. The dreams were identical across multiple subjects who had no contact with each other, explains Dr. Amanda Foster, a psychologist brought in to evaluate the team's mental health and determine whether the stress of the discovery was causing shared hallucinations. Endless corridors illuminated by artificial suns that cast no shadows, the sensation of being observed by intelligences that remained just beyond perception, and an overwhelming sense of recognition, as if they were remembering places they had somehow been before, experiences that belonged to someone else's lifetime. Dr. Emmanuel Dubois, from the Paris Observatory, described walking through vast chambers filled with specimens from thousands of different worlds, each one preserved in crystalline containers that maintained perfect environmental conditions across interstellar voyages lasting millions of years. The specimens weren't simply biological samples but complete ecosystem representations, trees that grew in impossible spirals, creatures that defied biological classification, and technologies that seemed to blend organic and mechanical elements into seamless wholes. 3 technicians from different facilities separated by thousands of miles, and having never met in person, reported identical experiences of being led through what appeared to be a museum of civilizations. Each display contained artifacts, biological samples, and historical records from different worlds at various stages of development. The museum was organized chronologically, showing the evolution of intelligence across the galaxy over periods spanning billions of years. The most disturbing aspect wasn't the content of the dreams, but their consistency and the level of detail that subjects could recall upon waking. Foster continues, her professional composure cracking as she describes phenomena that challenged everything she understood about human psychology. These people had no contact with each other, worked at different facilities across multiple continents, and had varying levels of knowledge about the classified discovery. Yet, their descriptions matched with photographic precision, down to architectural details, specimen arrangements, and even the emotional atmosphere of the spaces they described visiting. The dreams weren't limited to scientific staff directly involved in the discovery. Family members of researchers began experiencing similar visions, despite having no knowledge of the classified project or their relatives' involvement in humanity's first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. Children drew pictures of vast corridors and geometric structures they had never seen, using artistic techniques beyond their normal capabilities to render architectural spaces that followed non-human design principles. Spouses of team members reported dreams of being examined by presences that felt ancient and intelligent, undergoing procedures that seemed designed to catalogue and preserve human consciousness rather than cause harm. These examination dreams included detailed medical procedures that incorporated technologies beyond human understanding, suggesting the dreamers were experiencing memories from other humans who had undergone similar processes in the past. Sleep deprivation became epidemic among the research teams as people began staying awake to avoid the dreams that left them feeling as though their consciousness had been transported to the hidden craft while their bodies remained on Earth. Those who did sleep often woke with the unshakable feeling that they had been elsewhere, that part of their awareness had been borrowed by intelligences that wanted them to understand what was coming. September 16th. Dr. Ilyach's breakthrough in decoding the craft's transmissions came after 72 consecutive hours of analysis, sustained by caffeine, determination, and the growing certainty that humanity's survival might depend on understanding what the hidden intelligence was trying to communicate. His success in decrypting portions of the transmission would prove to be both humanity's greatest scientific achievement and its most terrifying revelation. The mathematical structures embedded in the signals weren't random or exploratory, Ilyach explains, his eyes red with exhaustion and strain, his hands shaking from too much caffeine and too little sleep. They formed a countdown sequence in a base numbering system that predated any known human mathematical development by thousands of years. We weren't dealing with a civilization that had recently achieved space travel or discovered mathematics independently. We were communicating with something that had been using advanced mathematical frameworks since before human writing was invented, possibly since before our species evolved. The countdown wasn't progressing towards zero, but towards a specific date and time that corresponded to Earth's optimal orbital position relative to the hidden craft. Mathematical analysis suggested the sequence would conclude when Earth reached a point of perfect alignment that occurred only once every 26,000 years, the same period as Earth's axial precession cycle, a cosmic rhythm that had been governing the planet's orientation in space since before complex life existed. Dr. Amanda Foster was brought in to examine potential connections between the countdown and human historical development, her research revealing correlations that challenged every assumption about human cultural evolution and the development of civilization on Earth. Every major leap in human development coincided with periods when Earth's orbit brought it into specific alignments with the craft's position, Foster explains. Her research notes spread across multiple whiteboards covered with timelines, astronomical calculations, and historical correlations that painted a picture of guided evolution spanning millennia. The development of agriculture, the rise of the first cities, the invention of writing systems, major technological breakthroughs, even specific cultural developments, all occurring when Earth moved into positions that would optimize communication with the hidden object. The implications were staggering and fundamentally changed humanity's understanding of its own history. Human civilization hadn't evolved through random chance and natural selection alone. It had been guided, influenced, perhaps even controlled by intelligences that had been observing and manipulating Earth's development for thousands of years, treating human progress like a carefully tended garden. Ancient texts took on new and terrifying meaning when examined through this lens of external manipulation. Egyptian descriptions of Ra's solar boat that would return when humanity achieved the ability to touch the heavens weren't mythology or religious symbolism. They were historical records of contact with the craft, instructions left by previous generations who had experienced direct communication with the hidden intelligence. Sumerian tablets describing Anu's celestial chariot that watched from the sun's embrace contained technical details about orbital mechanics that Sumerian astronomers couldn't possibly have understood without external instruction. The mathematical precision of their astronomical calculations, previously attributed to remarkable human insight, now appeared to be the result of direct teaching from the craft's occupants. The Dogon people's impossibly accurate knowledge of stellar mechanics, including details about star systems invisible to the naked eye and orbital periods that wouldn't be confirmed by human science for centuries, suggested they had been given information directly by the craft's occupants. Their oral traditions described teachers who came from a vessel hidden by the sun, sharing knowledge that would guide human development until the species was ready for the next phase of contact. We found references across every major civilization that had developed astronomical knowledge. Foster continues, her voice growing more strained as she describes discoveries that rewrote human history. Chinese texts describing dragon kings who lived behind the sun and would return when humanity achieved the ability to observe their domain. Mayan calendars that incorporated astronomical cycles they couldn't have calculated independently, predicting the return of gods from the solar realm. Hindu scriptures describing Vimanas that travelled between worlds using solar pathways, carrying beings who guided the development of earthly civilizations. Every culture that had looked to the stars had some version of the same story. Beings from a vessel hidden by the sun, who guided human development through careful intervention, leaving behind knowledge and instructions that would prepare humanity for eventual contact. The consistency across different continents and time periods suggested a coordinated program of cultural manipulation spanning thousands of years. September 18th. The craft's response to Dr. Ilyach's successful decoding was immediate, unmistakable, and demonstrated capabilities that rendered human technology primitive by comparison. Energy emissions increased by 300% within minutes of the decryption breakthrough, and for the first time since observation began, sections of the massive structure began showing signs of internal activity that suggested awakening from a dormant state that may have lasted millennia. Thermal imaging detected heat signatures moving through corridors that had appeared empty and lifeless for weeks. The movement patterns suggested intelligence and purpose, with thermal traces following logical pathways through the craft's interior architecture. Whatever had been sleeping within the massive structure was beginning to stir, activated by humanity's demonstration that it had achieved the technological and intellectual capability to detect and decode communications from beyond Earth. The pod chambers that had been dormant since the probe's final transmission began showing signs of systematic activation. Bioluminescent networks that had pulsed weekly began glowing with increasing frequency and intensity, creating light patterns visible even through the craft's energy-absorbing hull. Several pods showed thermal signatures consistent with occupants undergoing some kind of awakening process, suggesting that whatever specimens the craft contained were being prepared for activity. Most alarming were the changes in the craft's transmission patterns, which became more frequent, more complex, and began incorporating new elements that suggested preparation for active communication rather than passive observation. The signals began including what appeared to be star charts, orbital mechanics diagrams, and mathematical proofs that seemed designed to educate, rather than simply monitor, Earth's technological progress. The craft was no longer hiding its presence or maintaining passive observation, Corin explains, his voice heavy with the weight of understanding that would haunt him for his remaining days on Earth. It had been waiting for us to prove we could detect and decode its communications, watching for millennia, until we demonstrated the intellectual and technological capability required for the next phase of contact. Our success triggered some kind of protocol that had been dormant for possibly thousands of years. We had passed a test we didn't know we were taking, and now we were about to discover what we had won. Solar observatories detected subtle but measurable changes in the sun's magnetic field lines that defied every model of stellar physics developed by human science. The alterations were too precise and coordinated to be natural phenomena, suggesting the craft possessed technology that could manipulate stellar magnetic fields for purposes that remained unknown, but were clearly preparation for something that would affect the entire solar system. Communication blackouts became more frequent as government agencies struggled to contain information about the craft's increasing activity. Amateur radio operators reported strange interference patterns that seemed to carry structured information, creating communication links between operators separated by thousands of miles despite using equipment that shouldn't have been capable of such long-range transmission. Satellite communication systems experienced coordinated disruptions that followed the same timing as the craft's transmission schedule, suggesting that Earth's entire communications infrastructure was being tested or prepared for integration with systems beyond human understanding. September 20th evening, the weight of secrecy had become unbearable for Dr. Corin, a crushing psychological pressure that invaded his dreams and followed him through every waking moment. 3 weeks of sleepless nights, recurring visions that felt more real than his actual memories, and the growing certainty that humanity was approaching a threshold that would change everything, had pushed him beyond the breaking point where personal safety mattered less than species survival. The scheduled solar weather briefing provided the perfect opportunity to reveal the truth to a global audience of scientists and researchers who deserved to know what was coming for their world. The briefing was a regular occurrence, a routine update that most participants joined while multitasking, making it the ideal cover for the most important revelation in human history. I made the decision that morning while staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror and seeing a stranger looking back, Corin explains, his hands shaking as he recalls the moment when he chose humanity's right to know over his own safety. The briefing was scheduled for 8 p.m. Central European Time, with participants from observatories around the world logging in from their facilities. I had access to all the classified data, all the evidence we had accumulated over 3 weeks of investigation, and the growing certainty that whatever was coming would arrive whether humanity was prepared or not. The briefing began normally with routine reports on solar flare activity and magnetic field observations that masked the extraordinary situation developing behind the sun. Corin waited until 37 minutes into the presentation, when he knew most participants would be focused on the discussion but not yet thinking about ending the call, to return to their evening routines. Then, he activated screen sharing and began displaying the classified imagery and data that proved the existence of the massive craft hidden behind humanity's parent star. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the stunned audience, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. "We are not alone in this universe, and we never have been. 3 weeks ago, we discovered a massive artificial structure hidden behind our sun, a craft larger than any known celestial body in the inner solar system. It has been there for an unknown period, possibly since before human civilization began, observing our development and waiting for us to achieve the technological capability to detect its presence." The reaction was immediate chaos that threatened to crash the communication system. participants from observatories around the world began asking questions simultaneously, while government representatives in several locations began frantically attempting to end their connections or cut power to their facilities. Corin continued his presentation, displaying the decoded transmissions, the evidence of guided human development, and the implications for humanity's future, with the calm determination of a man who had already accepted the consequences of his actions. The message we decoded is simple, direct, and changes everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe, he continued, ignoring increasingly frantic attempts by various agencies to cut his connection. We are the Cedars. Your sun was our beacon. You are now within range. He explained the evidence, suggesting that human development had been guided and manipulated by the craft's occupants for millennia, the correlation between major technological advances and Earth's orbital alignment with the hidden object, and the biological effects that demonstrated the craft's ability to influence life on Earth through methods that transcended human scientific understanding. We assumed we evolved through natural selection and random chance, developing intelligence and technology through the normal processes of biological and cultural evolution, Corin said, his voice growing stronger as he realized this might be humanity's only warning before everything changed forever. We were wrong. We were cultivated like crops in a field, guided and shaped by gardeners who remained hidden until we developed the ability to detect their presence. The question now is whether we're ready for harvest and what that harvest means for our species' survival. The briefing continued for 17 more minutes as Corin displayed evidence that rewrote human history, revealed the true nature of Earth's place in a universe far more controlled than anyone had imagined, and prepared his species for contact with intelligences that had been manipulating human development since before recorded history. Government agencies successfully severed connections one by one, but the damage was irreversible. Recordings of Corin's revelation were already being shared across scientific networks, uploaded to secure servers, and transmitted to colleagues around the world. September 20th, 11:23 p.m. The craft's response to Corin's revelation exceeded every worst-case scenario the research teams had developed during their weeks of secret analysis. Radio telescopes worldwide detected a power surge from the hidden object that was visible across multiple wavelengths simultaneously, an energy release equivalent to a moderate solar flare but directed and controlled with surgical precision, rather than the chaotic violence typical of natural stellar phenomena. For the first time in recorded observation, and possibly the first time in millennia, the massive structure began moving with deliberate intent that demonstrated propulsion systems beyond human comprehension. The rotation that had been barely detectable over days of careful measurement accelerated to a pace visible on real-time monitoring equipment, the enormous bulk of the craft turning slowly but inexorably, like a planet changing its orientation in space. The movement brought the apertures that had pointed harmlessly away from Earth into direct alignment with humanity's home world. Massive openings that could serve as observation ports, communication arrays, or weapon systems, depending on the intentions of the craft's occupants. The mechanical precision of the rotation suggested computer-controlled systems that could target any object in the solar system with terrifying accuracy. The sun's corona began destabilizing in ways that violated every model of stellar physics developed by human science over centuries of observation. Magnetic field lines twisted into configurations that resembled geometric patterns rather than the chaotic tangles typical of natural solar activity. The patterns were too precise, too organized to be random, suggesting external manipulation of stellar forces through technology that treated stars like controllable tools. Flare activity increased by 400% within hours of the craft's movement, but the flares followed the craft's transmission schedule with precision that proved the sun itself was being used as part of a communication system. Solar storms that should have been chaotic and destructive, instead followed organized patterns that suggested the craft was using Earth's parent star as a massive amplification device. The sun itself was responding to commands from the craft, Dr. Price explains in her emergency transmission from Goddard Space Flight Center, her voice barely controlled as she described observations that shattered humanity's understanding of stellar mechanics. Whatever technology they possessed could manipulate stellar magnetic fields, essentially turning our sun into a controllable broadcast antenna. The implications were beyond anything we had prepared for. They weren't just using advanced technology, they were manipulating the fundamental forces that govern stellar behavior. Solar observatories detected structured emissions from the enhanced flare activity that contained the same mathematical progressions found in the craft's direct transmissions. The sun was being used as a broadcast system, sending signals that would be detectable across interstellar distances and could reach potential recipients throughout the galaxy. Earth's parent star had become a beacon, announcing that the seeding program had reached its predetermined conclusion. The final transmission from the craft came exactly 3 hours after Corin's revelation, timed with precision that suggested the craft's occupants had been monitoring human communications and understood the significance of the broadcast to Earth's scientific community. Every radio telescope on Earth, from the massive arrays at Arecibo to amateur equipment in suburban backyards, received the same message simultaneously. The signal was so powerful, it overloaded sensitive equipment, created audible interference on communication systems around the globe, and could be heard as static on ordinary radio receivers, tuned to specific frequencies. The message was brief but unambiguous, transmitted in the same mathematical language that Dr. Ilyich had spent weeks decoding. Phase 1 complete, harvest protocol initiated, prepare for integration. Seismic monitoring stations detected coordinated tectonic activity as the Earth itself began resonating in response to signals from the craft that penetrated the planet's surface and reached its molten core. The resonance wasn't random geological activity, but followed the same mathematical progressions that had characterized the craft's transmissions, as if the planet was being tuned like a massive instrument in preparation for some cosmic symphony. The harvest begins. In the hours following the final transmission, the effects of the craft's activation became impossible to ignore, deny, or explain through conventional scientific understanding. Aurora activity extended far beyond the polar regions, where Earth's magnetic field normally confined such phenomena, creating visible light displays at latitudes where they had never been observed in recorded history. The aurora patterns weren't the random beauty typical of natural geomagnetic storms, but formed geometric shapes that pulsed in perfect synchronization with transmissions from the hidden craft. Satellite networks experienced coordinated failures that couldn't be attributed to solar activity alone, despite official government explanations that blamed the disruptions on unprecedented but natural electromagnetic disturbances. Global positioning systems became unreliable as the craft's influence affected the fundamental references used for navigation, leaving ships, aircraft, and land-based navigation systems dependent on technologies that had been obsolete for decades. Communication satellites found their signals being redirected and amplified by unknown technology that operated beyond human understanding, creating communication links that span distances far beyond their designed capabilities. Messages transmitted between Earth stations were being relayed through systems that appeared to extend throughout the solar system, suggesting that humanity's communication infrastructure had been quietly integrated into a much larger network without anyone realizing it was happening. The biological effects that had been limited to animals with sensitive magnetic navigation systems expanded to affect all life on Earth in ways that demonstrated the craft's ability to influence biological processes through methods that transcended current scientific understanding. Plants began exhibiting growth patterns that defied botanical knowledge accumulated over centuries of study. growing towards specific points in the sky regardless of sun position or normal phototropic responses. Flowers opened and closed in unison across vast geographical areas that spanned multiple continents, following rhythms that matched the craft's transmission schedule, rather than natural circadian cycles governed by Earth's rotation. Gardens in different time zones synchronized their blooming cycles, creating coordinated displays of natural beauty that suggested external control of biological processes. Human physiology began showing subtle but measurable changes that appeared in medical monitoring systems around the world. Sleep patterns became synchronized across different time zones, with people worldwide experiencing similar dream cycles regardless of their local schedule or normal sleep habits. The synchronization crossed cultural and linguistic boundaries, affecting individuals who had no contact with each other and no knowledge of the global phenomenon. Brainwave patterns during these synchronized sleep periods showed unusual coherence that resembled network computer systems more than individual human consciousness. EEG readings revealed that people separated by thousands of miles were experiencing nearly identical neural activity during sleep, as if multiple minds were being connected through some unknown mechanism that operated beyond the limitations of space and time. The craft wasn't just revealing itself to humanity, Corin explains in his final recorded statement, made in a hotel room in Geneva, where he spent his last night on Earth as a free human being. It was beginning the process of integration it had been preparing for since before human civilization began. We had been cultivated, guided, and shaped into a species that could serve its purposes across interstellar distances. The harvest wasn't about destroying humanity. It was about collecting the end product of a biological and cultural engineering project that had taken millennia to complete. Medical facilities worldwide reported increasing numbers of people experiencing what they described as memories of places they had never been, experiences that felt more real than their actual lives on Earth. The memories were consistent across different subjects, regardless of their cultural background, education level, or previous beliefs about extraterrestrial life. They described vast chambers filled with specimens from multiple worlds, libraries containing the accumulated knowledge of galactic civilizations, and the overwhelming presence of ancient intelligences that had been collecting and preserving life throughout the galaxy for periods spanning geological ages. The most disturbing reports came from individuals who claimed to remember being aboard the craft in some capacity, working alongside its occupants to catalogue and preserve species from Earth and other worlds in a cosmic preservation project that spanned multiple star systems. These weren't dreams or hallucinations induced by stress or media exposure. They were detailed, consistent memories of participating in activities that spanned years or decades of subjective time while their bodies remained on Earth, living normal human lives. The new reality. Dr. Nathan Korrin disappeared from his hotel room in Geneva on September 21st at approximately 3:30 a.m., vanishing during the early hours when human consciousness operates at its lowest ebb and reality seems most flexible. Security footage shows him leaving the building alone, walking purposefully toward a waiting vehicle that appeared empty to the cameras, but which he approached as if meeting old friends. His movements were calm and deliberate, showing no signs of coercion or distress, suggesting that his departure was voluntary and expected. The footage cuts out as he approaches the vehicle, replaced by 3 minutes of static that technical analysis revealed contained structured interference patterns matching the craft's transmission signatures. When the recording resumes, it shows an empty street with no trace of Corin or the vehicle, as if both had simply faded from reality. Similar disappearances occurred simultaneously around the globe, coordinated with precision that demonstrated surveillance and planning capabilities beyond human comprehension. Scientists, researchers, and individuals who had demonstrated understanding of the craft's true nature vanished without trace from secure facilities, locked rooms, and locations under constant observation. In each case, security footage showed the subjects leaving their locations willingly, often appearing to respond to something invisible to electronic monitoring systems. Dr. Eliana Price disappeared from her secured laboratory at Goddard Space Flight Center while under protective custody, walking past armed guards who later claimed they had received orders to allow her departure. Dr. Pavel Ilyich vanished from a safe house in Moscow, leaving behind only a handwritten note in multiple languages stating, "The integration has begun. Do not mourn for us. We go to complete the work we started." Solar activity remains at unprecedented levels, with effects being felt throughout the solar system in ways that suggest fundamental changes to the physical laws governing stellar behavior. Mars observation missions detected aurora activity on the red planet for the first time in recorded history. Massive light displays that form geometric patterns visible from Earth-based telescopes. The gas giant's magnetic fields showed coordinated fluctuations that suggested system-wide influence from technology that could manipulate planetary magnetospheres as easily as human science adjusts radio frequencies. The craft itself has become partially visible to Earth-based observation as its energy emissions increase and its hull begins reflecting more solar radiation. Amateur astronomers with appropriate filters can now observe a dark outline that appears and disappears in coordination with solar rotation, a massive silhouette that dwarfs any celestial body in the inner solar system. Professional observatories remain under strict communication restrictions, but their continued silence speaks volumes about what their instruments are detecting on a daily basis. Radio transmissions from the craft continue on a regular schedule, growing more complex and incorporating elements that suggest preparation for large-scale operations involving not just Earth, but the entire solar system. The transmissions now include what appear to be instructions or protocols, as if humanity is being prepared for integration into a larger system that spans interstellar distances and operates according to principles beyond current human understanding. Analysis of the transmitted protocols reveals organizational structures that suggest the craft is part of a much larger network of similar vessels operating throughout the galaxy. References to other star systems, coordination schedules spanning centuries, and resource allocation discussions indicate that Earth's situation is not unique. Similar seeding and harvesting operations are being conducted on worlds throughout the local galactic region. The seeders have revealed themselves, but their revelation was not the beginning of contact. It was the announcement that a project spanning geological time periods had reached its predetermined conclusion. Humanity was never alone in the universe, never the dominant intelligence in its own solar system, and never free to develop according to its own choices and preferences. Every major advance in human civilization had been guided by intelligences that remained hidden until their cultivation project was ready for harvest. What remains unknown is whether integration with the Seeders' galactic system represents evolution or extinction for human civilization as it has existed for thousands of years. The craft continues its slow rotation, its apertures now fully aligned with Earth's orbital path, and its transmission suggests that the next phase of contact will begin when Earth reaches optimal alignment in its orbit around the Sun, an alignment that occurs in approximately 72 hours. The Harvest Protocol has been initiated by intelligences that view human civilization as the successful completion of a cultivation project spanning millennia. The gardeners who shaped human development from the shadows are ready to collect what they have spent geological ages creating. Humanity is about to discover its true purpose in a universe far stranger, more controlled, and more terrifying than anyone had imagined possible. The craft behind the Sun pulses with increasing activity, its massive bulk preparing for operations that will transform not just human civilization but the entire solar system. Earth orbits closer to its appointment with destiny, carrying a species that has finally learned the truth about its origins and purpose. We were never meant to inherit the stars. We were meant to serve those who already own them. The integration begins in 72 hours. The Cedars are coming home, and humanity's childhood as a free species is about to end forever